fans of Sinead O'Connor will be pleased to hear she's working on a new album, but she's also been busy writing her memoir, Rememberings, which gives an intimate insight into the chapters of her life.
The musician and activist writes candidly about her childhood and some of the abuse she faced, her rise to fame, and the relationships that changed her life. And it is an absolute privilege to say that Sinead joins us now from Dublin. A very good morning to you. It is really wonderful to have you on the show. And I have to say, I've taken the sleeve off because I was reading it in the bath. That's too much information, but that's why it's not there.
Here we go.
But you've got the real one there. But what really struck me was this extraordinary, visceral sort of body response you've had to music from a very young age, a sort of spiritual, sort of an uncontrollable reaction to music. I mean, it's this brilliant moment. I think you were only 5 or something and you cried, you wept at a song and your dad had to sort of carry you to bed and put you to bed. It's an extraordinary life you've led. And, of course, can you remember when you first felt sort of so lit up by music and what that experience is like? Because I think it's quite rare, actually, to have that feeling in your body for music.
Yeah, well, I guess the very first time I remember that visceral reaction would be that particular Christmas Eve. In Ireland, the tradition is we don't put the baby into the crib until Christmas Eve. I don't know if you do that there. So, you know, you would be kneeling at the crib before you went to bed. You'd be putting the baby Jesus in the thing. And I do remember having quite visceral and visual reactions to the songs. In particular, it was the song Hark the Herald Angels Sing. And in my head, as a child, you know, you'd think magically I could see all these angels descending from heaven, you know, all made out of light and all of that kind of stuff, you know. And then the song that used to kill me, and I can never sing it because it makes me cry so much, is The Little Drummer Boy. It's not the greatest song on earth, but it has one of the most beautiful lines. Then he smiled at me. You know, I played my best for him. And then he smiled at me. That just used to make me cry buckets, you know. So, yeah, I guess that being very small and then being about 4 years of age, the way Ireland was, the kids were allowed to wander the streets even when you were tiny. And I remember with my footsteps at a very small age, there was a particular day that I was walking home and I began to hear music in time to my footsteps. And I remember looking at God going, oh my God, thank you, like he's after giving me music, because I was praying that I might get out of the particular awkward circumstances I was in. And I saw that at about 4 years of age as being my answer to my prayers, was that God had given me music. And from then on I began to hear tunes and music anytime I heard like a rhythm, like a train or a clock ticking, or in the old days the ladies, when they wore tights, when they walked, you could hear their thighs rubbing off the tights. And even then I would hear music, you know. So,
I mean, it sounds
very
spiritual.
Small, and my parents...
Yeah.
Sorry.
Your musical experience sounds like a spiritual experience. It's really fascinating.
Yeah, very much so. And then when I get to about 11, I start listening to Bob Dylan. And the record that really changed my life was Bob Dylan's first Christian album, which was called Slow Train Coming. And I had grown up in a country where the religious music was frankly so awful that it must have made God cry all day long. And it was really uncool, and nobody wanted to get involved with religious music, you know. So then Bob Dylan comes out with this record, Slow Train Coming, when I'm about 13, and he makes religious music cool and sexy and everything, you know. And Bob Dylan, in my mind, became a father figure. Again, in the Ireland I grew up in, if a marriage broke up, the women had all the power, and if they didn't let the father see the children, there was nothing the father could do about it. So I was in that circumstance where my mother had prevented my father from seeing me for couple of years maybe. In the midst of that comes out Slow Train Coming, and I'm in need of a male role model, and Bob Dylan becomes my godfather slash male role model in terms of spirituality and also what type of artist I want to be.
Sinead,
you know?
Talking of religion, you know, I'm Muslim, from a Muslim background, and, you know, when we heard the news that you had, as you call it, reverted to Islam, it was a surprise to many people, but reading your book, I really understood a lot more. You're very heartfelt. You talk about being a Muslim and turning to Islam like it felt coming home. And I think, you know, I'm paraphrasing, you felt like you've always been Muslim and it's just you finally got there in the end. Just tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, it does say in the Quran, for those that are real Muslims, you know, that you will feel when you read it like you always were Muslim. That's why they call it reverting. So I've always been interested in theology. Again, not to go on about Ireland too much, but I grew up in a Catholic theocracy. And I began studying the Bible when I was small. I wanted to know, what's this book that's oppressing my people, you know? And then I went to London. I began to get interested in the Rastafari movement. I got very interested in Hinduism, general theology, Judaic theology, everything. And I had left the Quran to last because even I were prejudiced. I had bought into the nonsense that people talk about Islam. But as a theologist then, when I got to look at just chapter 2 of the Quran, in fact, if that's all you listen to was chapter 2, it pretty much encapsulates what's in the rest of the Quran. When I read it and listened to it, it's a song, really. It's a wrong way of putting it, but the Quran is sung. Muhammad didn't read or write. So it's a very interesting song, and it's better, you pick it up better if you listen to it. But when I read it and listened to it, again, as an Irish person, we love words. The intelligence of the scripture, the intelligence of the way Allah uses language, to me that shows that it could only have been supernaturally written. There is no human being on earth could have put together the language and composition of the Quran, you know? Yeah,
you said something very interesting about the call to prayer. That lots of people will have heard the call to prayer. We see it sort of dramatised and we see it in news reports. You've called it the most mathematically intelligent piece of music that you've ever heard. And as a musician, that's some statement, really.
Yeah, it's the greatest song ever composed. Actually, every syllable of it is perfect. Everything it states about belief is perfect. The hope and the encouragement in it, again, coming from Catholicism, which I was born into, you know, Islam is completely the opposite. Catholicism, you know, not meaning any disrespect to Catholics, but it has an awful lot in it about death, the sort of worship of death in some ways. You know, an altar isn't sacrosanct unless it has a part of the dead body of a saint in it, for example, you know, and there's no redemption. And the songs are really miserable. There's nothing hopeful about the songs, in my experience. And with the call to prayer, it's the most hopeful song I've ever heard, you know, and so moving. And I used to listen to it for years, every night before shows, before I even studied Islam. So I didn't even know what the people were saying when they were reciting it, and it still was very moving. There's something just about the yearning, the guys that recite it, the kind of yearning they have in it. It speaks to Irish people. We have the same yearning in our music. But again, the composition, like the intelligence of Islamic writing, the way that things are composed and put together is phenomenal, really. And for Irish people, we love that, you know.
And what's brilliant about the book, actually, is that it obviously covers your relationship with your mum, which was extremely difficult, and you talk in some, you know, really quite upsetting detail, which must have been very difficult for you to write about, if you allow me to say, the sort of violence that you faced at home. But at the same time in the book, there are some really funny moments as well. And your reaction to your sister having Barry Manilow posters in the bedroom that you shared is very funny. And it comes back to that idea that... just tell us a bit about that moment, because I think when people are thinking about Sinead O'Connor, they think of somebody who's very complex, and you've done some very interesting and quite controversial things. But I suppose some of it is just realising that you were just a girl growing up in your family too and trying to find your way.
Yeah, well, again, Ireland, so myself and my sister, we shared a bed until we were 13, and we had an imaginary line down the middle of the bed, and if either of us crossed it, we'd be kicking each other, you know, and we progressed then to having 2 beds in the same room, but my sister was in love with Barry Manilow. and she used to have his posters on the wall, and I would have posters of Susie and the Banshees, you know. And so for each of us, it was a nightmare. She'd wake up looking at Susie and be horrified, and I'd wake up looking at Barry and be horrified. I could never understand why she fancied Barry Manilow, you know. And I mean, some of his songs I kind of liked, but he wasn't, you know, the best looking dude on earth, you know. But still, it was a horror show for me, waking up looking at Barry Manilow. God help me. I mean, some of his songs, again, I love, so I don't mean any disrespect as such, but Jesus, he wasn't really terribly good looking, was he?
It was it's an extraordinarily honest book, and such a great read. I urge anybody, I think even if somebody didn't know anything about your career, and I can't imagine anybody doesn't, but you know, you connect so well with the reader, I feel. So many little tidbits. I've got to bring this up. I was so surprised. I had to read it twice going, you were once a Kissogram. Sinead O'Connor was a Kissogram. How did that happen? I know. Well, when I was 16, I was a terrible Kissogram because I was very shy. So I was 16, and again, in Ireland in those days, you'd have jobs all the time. In fact, from the age of 11, we all had jobs, you know, restaurants or whatever in the summer holidays. So anyway, I had a job in a pizza place, but I also don't know why I was interested in it. I think I liked the outfits, but I was, Kissogram and the whole thing. My favourite was the Naughty Nun, God forgive me, because it had...
no surprise.
At the back, it was a full-length nun's outfit, but at the back it was all cut away and you had garters and everything. But then you had to go and you'd read a terrible poem in a French accent. It was awful. And then you would put a pair of knickers on the fella's head, you know. So I'd be reading it like this. I was mortified because I was real Irish, and of course in those days none of us were sexy, you know. So it was real weird. Yeah, and then there's a story in the book about driving around the graveyard looking for my mother's grave in the Kissogram car, and the company was called Hot Lips. The man had a red car, and on top of it a huge pair of red lips. And we're driving around, and he's in his gorilla outfit, and I'm in my French maid outfit. We're driving around the graveyard looking for my mother's grave. Yeah.
Sinead, it is an incredible story, and of course
there's a good picture of there's a good picture of the French maid thing in the book. I was saying they should have put it on the cover. We'd have sold that's true. More books.
But listen, we've run out of time, but, you know, you talk a lot about how, you know, being #1 in America with Nothing Compares to You made you feel very, very scared and frightened, and the fame has been a frightening thing. But in a word, do you thank God, I guess, for the fame you've had, just in a moment?
Yeah, I feel I identify very much with Naomi Osaka and what she's going through in the last 2 days. Fame at such an early age can cause problems. It's not easy for a young person, you know.
Well, we are so grateful for your book, actually. It's a really good read, and thank you so much for being on the show this morning. What a pleasure to have you on. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sinead O'Connor.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Lots of love.